Sorry, guys, I just got back in. Give me a second. Still getting all set up. All right, let's get the story up. I'm going to adjust the microphone while I'm at it. Super yawn. Oof. Okay. Right, there it is. All right, we left off on chapter 6. Okay, so we are there. Good. All right, welcome, everybody. Hello. Hope you're all doing well. Thank you so much for coming. This is the Raven's Roost, or Raven Reads. Yes, I'm tired. I've had a long day, okay? I'm sorry. Anyway, this is the stream where I read. This is the stream where I read to you guys. Usually I read my own stories, my own books and stuff that I've written, and I look forward to reading with you guys here. We are going to be picking up on Monster Club, which is one of my favorite stories that I've ever written, and one of the ones that I have finished, but I will never officially publish because it's kind of a personal story for me. We've read through chapters 1 through 5. We're picking up on chapter 6 today, and I'm very, very excited to jump back into that because a lot happens in these next few chapters. We're going to read probably to chapter 11 or 12 tonight, and then we will call it, but wanted to get some more reading done. So, wanted to let you guys know a couple things, go over the rules real quick. So, I know that some stuff has been announced with For Honor and some other stuff, but I want to remind you guys, politely, we don't talk about gaming stuff on these streams. We don't talk about politics. We don't talk about movies. We don't talk about current events. We just focus on the reading and writing. So, again, I want to reiterate the point. We don't talk about other stuff on these streams. If you want to talk to me about other stuff, you can message me in Discord or leave it on a comment on a recent video if you absolutely have to. But for these streams, I try not to be distracted by other things. We'll talk about For Honor and stuff like that another time. I know that doesn't make me the most attentive of For Honor creators, but it is something that I care about. For me, telling stories, writing, and reading are way more important to me than playing games. And being able to read these stories to you guys is one of my favorite things to do. So I want to treat this with the respect, diligence, and integrity that it deserves. Okay? Okay. So, with all that said, Monster Club. We left off on chapter 6. We are going to pick up from there. And, oh yeah, the second rule, please don't mock me for my reading voice. I cannot sound like a woman, but there are a lot of girls in the story, so bear with me, okay? All right, here we go. Chapter 6 of Monster Club. After the conversation with Solomon, Abraham went up to his room and lay down. He stared up at the ceiling from his bed and considered all that had been going on. So many thoughts and feelings flooded his consciousness, most of them about the strange group of monsters he now had to live with. Though he was starting to like them, he couldn't help but think of them as monsters or something subhuman. Something deep down told him that this was a cold stereotype, almost as if he was being somewhat racist, but he simply couldn't help his thoughts. After all, he barely knew them. A drider that is open and friendly and likes to sew clothes. A werewolf who is strong and a loyal leader for her family. A shy and timid mermaid with a little girl's crush. A vampire with unbelievable power and intimidating abilities. And finally, a mummy with a sense of humor and a secret love and a few secrets of his own that he doesn't want to talk about. Top it all off with a ghost who owns an old lake house that several potential buyers are interested in. You've got one very strange but oddly interesting group of misfit monsters. What have I gotten myself into? Abraham muttered. All this is happening so fast, I'm just not sure what to do. Abraham rolled over in bed and listened to the sounds around the house. Despite his fatigue, he couldn't sleep. There was too much on his mind. He was interrupted from his thoughts by a knock at the door. "Who is it?" Abraham called. The door finally opened, and Abraham had to stifle a scream of terror. In, on all 8 legs, walked Sarah. He still was trying to get over the shock of her appearance. It's just not easy to simply overlook a beautiful young girl with spider legs. Sarah was smiling, her fangs glinting against the light of the overhead light. She beamed and scuttled over to Abraham. Her hands were behind her back as if hiding something. "How are you, Abraham?" she asked. Abraham shrugged. "Still getting used to the house," he admitted. Sarah giggled. "I'll admit, it was a little strange at first for me too, but you'll get used to it over time." Sarah grinned and suddenly pulled her hands out from behind her and showed Abraham what she'd been hiding. In her hands was a long and lovely jacket. It was blue, with a silver stripe running along the chest, and another one running down the sleeve. It was very nice. "Sarah, what is that?" Abraham asked. "It's a jacket," Sarah giggled. "It's yours. Try it on." Abraham took the jacket from her hands as he threw off his own dirty and muddy splattered one. He slipped on the new blue jacket and suddenly felt a smooth sensation all over his body. The inside of the jacket was made of pure silk. It felt unbelievably smooth to the touch, and it hugged his body tightly. The arm length and size of the jacket were almost perfect. It still felt wonderful on his body. "Sarah, it fits great. It feels so good." "Of course it does," Sarah said with a proud smile. "I made it with my own silk." Abraham stopped and stared at her, then at her abdomen. Suddenly, his jacket had a very different feel on his body. "Wait, so you mean that the material in this jacket came out of your butt?" Sarah burst out into a fit of laughter that made even Abraham grin. There was something he noticed about Sarah. No matter what, she always seemed so happy and joyful. It was uplifting, especially considering all that he'd been through. "No," Sarah cackled. "My silk comes from the silk glands at the base of my spine, just at the tip of my abdomen, just like any normal spider." Abraham blushed and rubbed the smooth jacket. Sorry," Abraham said sheepishly, and Sarah waved it aside. "Oh, don't worry about it. Tamil picks on me about that all the time." "Do you make clothes for the others?" Abraham asked, and Sarah nodded. "Oh, all the time, in fact," Sarah said. "How do you like your new jacket?" Sarah asked. Abraham pulled on the jacket and felt how strong it was, and then admired how nice it felt on his body and how smooth the material was. After he'd gotten over the shock of it being made from her own abdomen, it was a wonderful jacket. "It's really great. Remarkable. How did you make it so quickly?" Sarah blushed and smiled, flexing her arms a little. "You are looking at the best weaver ever. I can make clothes lickety-split," Sarah said gladly. But you can't clean a room in an hour." Sarah and Abraham spun around to see Michelle standing by the entrance. She was grinning at the two of them. Sarah beamed and turned to face Michelle, and Michelle looked at Abraham, back to Sarah, and then back at Abraham again. "I just wanted to tell you two that supper's almost ready." Abraham's eyes widened in surprise. "Wait, supper?" Sarah and Michelle both stared at him. "Well, yeah. We may not be human, but we still eat," Sarah said stiffly. Abraham shook his head. Of course, yeah, obviously. I knew that. I didn't realize that you all just ate together," Abraham said. Sarah and Michelle exchanged glances. "Of course we eat together. We're a family," Michelle said. Abraham nodded as he considered that obvious fact. "Sorry, I didn't, I didn't think that monsters could be social," Michelle finished coldly. "Well, today's just full of surprises for you, isn't it?" "Michelle," Sarah moaned, "please be nice. He's still getting used to us." Michelle sighed and nodded her head in understanding. "Yeah, sure. Whatever. Regardless, it's supper time." Michelle walked away from the door and vanished. Sarah turned to face Abraham, a slightly sad look on her face, though she was trying to smile. "I'm really sorry about that, Abraham." "No, I'm the one who should be sorry," Abraham admitted. Sarah grinned and moved to the door. "Well, let's go," she said. Abraham nodded and hurried after Sarah as she walked towards the stairs. "Oh, and Sarah?" Michelle turned around to face him from the bottom of the stairway. "I didn't wake Asher. Could you get him, please?" Sarah almost turned, but Abraham stopped her quickly. "Oh, no, you go ahead. I'll get him," Abraham said. Sarah smiled her gratitude and rushed downstairs anyway. Abraham spun to face the door that Asher had vanished into a while ago and pushed it open carefully. The inside of the room was quite unlike Sarah's. It wasn't quite as large, but there was still plenty of room to move around. It was rather dusty and dark. There was little light to speak of except for the setting sun that glowed through the window on the wall. Abraham turned to see where the bed in the room was, but there didn't seem to be one. There was a great amount of room in the place, but the only furniture was a closet, a dresser, and a small refrigerator. At the far end of the room, there was a large box that looked longer than Abraham was tall. He walked closer and suddenly discovered what this box was. A coffin. Abraham hissed in horror. And it was indeed a coffin, and Abraham quickly remembered the stories he'd heard about vampires sleeping in coffins. Could Asher be sleeping in that? What would he do if he opened the coffin? Would he be mad? However, the moment he knew that Michelle was in a bad mood herself, and he would rather not make her more angry, he walked over to the coffin and knocked on the lid. Asher, sorry to bother you, it's, supper time. There was no response within the large black coffin. Abraham began to question whether it was really his bed or not. There was only one way to know for sure. Abraham placed his hands along the lid and pulled it away. He leapt away, expecting to be a very pissed vampire inside jumping out at him, but nothing happened. Abraham dared to take a look in the coffin, and there was nothing there. Nobody was inside. Abraham looked down over the coffin, looked behind it to see what might be around it. Can I help you? Ah! Abraham nearly jumped 5 feet in the air as he jumped backwards, falling up against a hard object right behind him, causing him to leap forward again in terror. He spun quickly around to see a very familiar figure standing there. Asher stood behind him, in nothing but dark jeans and his cross necklace, his bare chest exposed. His feet were also bare. His hair was a bit of a mess, like he'd just been sleeping. His red eyes were boring into his curiously. Abraham felt torn between wanting to run away and stand his ground. I said, can I help you? Asher asked. Abraham opened his mouth to speak, but just as he was about to talk, the door opened up. Abraham, what is taking you so... Michelle stopped speaking when she saw Asher standing in front of him, and she grinned. Well, look who's finally among the living. Oh, that's funny. Did you spend all day coming up with that one? Asher asked with a smirk. Michelle shook her head and turned to leave. You want to throw something over your chest so you can join us for supper, Asher? Michelle asked. I'd say you could just come down as you are, but I think it might give Calypso a heart attack to see you like that. She then walked out, leaving Abraham alone with a half-naked and very much blushing vampire. Anyway, there's something you wanted? Asher asked as he walked to his dressing room again, pulling out shirts. No, just, let me guess. Michelle asked you to come and wake me up, didn't she? Abraham could only nod. He was still shaking from the scare Asher had brought on him. Well, you can head on down for supper. I'll be down in just a minute. Abraham started to leave, but then paused and looked at Asher. He couldn't help but notice the sleeplessness behind his eyes. He was tired, and more than anything, he could tell he was sad. Asher, I know about Katie. Asher suddenly stiffened and his eyes widened. His red pupils seemed to ignite and turn to rest on him. Do you? Asher asked. Yeah, she's the one you've been searching for, Abraham said nervously. Asher looked back down at his fists clenched up in frustration. That's right, Asher snarled. And I almost closed in on those damn bastards if it hadn't been for that storm. Asher, who are the Dawnbringers? Are they really, strong? Asher closed his eyes and breathed slowly. The less you know about them, the better, Abraham. Just don't worry about it. This is for me to deal with, not you. Why you, though? Come on, food's on the table, Asher said. He threw on a black t-shirt and walked to the door. Abraham could tell there was more on Asher's mind and that the poor creature was exhausted, but there was no point in pressing the matter now. He was quite interested to see what supper was like for a family of monsters. The kitchen was a bit brighter than it had been the last time he'd been in it. There was also food everywhere. There was normal food that you would expect, spaghetti, salad, bread, but there were also some other things that, Abraham couldn't believe belonged on the table. There was a bottle of wine, although no one looked older than 19 or 20. There was also a raccoon that appeared to be frozen in place, as if petrified. There was a raw steak that still looked a little bloody sitting on a platter on the table, and there was also different sushi and fish delicacies. There was no theme, no rhyme or reason to anything. What was it with half of these dining options? Everyone was taking their seats at the table, with the exception of Sarah, who seemed to be hanging from the ceiling like a spider. Abraham, you'll be sitting beside Tamil and Solomon, Michelle said, pointing to an empty chair. Abraham walked around the table and sat down. Tamil smiled and Solomon nodded in his direction. Michelle looked around the table and saw that everyone was there and grinning. All right, all here, Solomon smiled. Abraham, in this household it is a tradition that we say grace before eating. Abraham nodded his understanding and bowed his head along with the others. He waited until grace was said, but he noticed something was odd about the prayer. At the very end of it, he heard Solomon speak. As you know, he said, there is one missing from our number tonight. Please keep her safe. Bring her back to us in one piece, if it be your will. And bless this food. Amen. As he said the final words, movement could be felt around the table, but also waves of emotions at the reminder of Katie. Abraham said nothing, but watched as the others began to eat. He observed everyone eating in the feast before them, but how they ate astonished him. Solomon was watching quietly as everyone ate, since he himself was unable to join them. Michelle had thrown a raw slab of steak down in front of her and was now cutting into it with her teeth. She growled softly like an animal as she tore away at the meat and ripped it apart. That Abraham couldn't help but notice, her canine teeth looked a little sharper than his own, but not quite as long and sharp as Asher's. There was something feral about her. Perhaps it was her werewolf blood. Tamil wasn't eating a lot himself. He would occasionally reach across the table and grab a piece of fruit or a bread slice to chew on. Calypso's eyes seemed to brighten over the sushi and fish dishes as she took her time selecting which ones to try first. When she got hold of one, she ate it so fast that it was almost like she never put it on her plate. Abraham had never stopped to consider that mermaids probably had a real liking for seafood. Meanwhile, Asher had nothing on his plate. However, there was a bottle of some sort in front of him, and it turned out it was the wine. Only Abraham began to realize it may not have been wine. Every now and then he would lift the bottle to his lips and take a swig of its contents. At first, Abraham couldn't tell what it was or why, until a small trickle of red liquid dripped down the side of Asher's cheek. He now knew that this wine was actually blood. Asher was drinking from a bottle of blood, which made Abraham both mystified and horrified at the same moment. However, it was Sarah that caused Abraham to squirm in his chair. Abraham finally discovered what that paralyzed raccoon was for. Sarah lifted it up to her perch above the table. She held the animal close to her face. She opened her mouth, revealing her own long and terrifying fangs, as she plunged them into the animal's body. The animal didn't move, but Abraham could tell that it was a most unpleasant feeling. Suddenly, Abraham noticed that Sarah looked almost like she was chewing on it and slurping. And then he pieced it together. Abraham had read somewhere that spiders inject venom into their food so that the insides turn to mush. Then they drink out the fluids. And that must be exactly what Abraham was watching. He had to force himself to look away. "Everything all right?" Solomon asked. "Yeah, just not very hungry," Abraham muttered. There was a small echo of laughter around the table as they all could tell that Abraham was not accustomed to their eating habits. "Don't worry. You'll get used to it," Solomon assured him. They continued to eat for another hour, swapping stories, laughing with each other. Abraham began to enjoy their company. It was like he was honestly with a real family, though he couldn't feel like he was a part of it yet. He forgot for a brief period that they weren't human, and he forgot that their eating habits were less than civilized. He couldn't help but enjoy everything that he was seeing and hearing. It was a truly unique experience. After a while, the talking and laughing died down, and Solomon cleared his throat for everyone to pay attention. "All right, it's getting late, for most of us anyway, and we have a very big day tomorrow. It's one that we've known has been coming for a while, and we have to be ready for it. So you all know what to do." Abraham looked around the table and saw mixed expressions, but none were positive. Everyone looked anxious or nervous about something, especially Michelle. "Asher, I know you want to get back on the trail, but I need you here for tonight and tomorrow if you don't mind." "We're all going to need you," Solomon said. Asher nodded. "Yeah, I understand," he said darkly. Michelle nodded in his direction as if offering a silent thank you. "Calypso, I want you to be on standby when things settle down. I have a feeling that your abilities will be necessary. Sarah, I need you to start blocking off the yard tomorrow morning with your webs, dear. I don't want this getting out of the yard." Both Calypso and Sarah nodded quietly, and Michelle smiled sadly at them both, again with that unsaid thank you expression. Abraham, however, was very confused. "Hold on, guys, hold on. What's happening tomorrow?" Abraham spoke up. The whole house turned to look at him in surprise. Michelle stared down at the floor, unable to look at anyone. Abraham had never seen her look so anxious. "Tomorrow is the full moon, Abraham," Michelle whispered. "Tomorrow I transform." Abraham stared at her. How could he have forgotten? Of course you would transform in the full moon. That kind of thing goes along with being a werewolf. "Every full moon, the house prepares so that we can keep her from getting loose and losing control," Solomon explained. "Sarah uses her webs to create fences around the yard for Michelle to stay in, and Asher keeps her occupied." "Occupied?" Abraham asked, a little breathlessly. Asher took another swig from his bottle, but didn't answer. "He's the only one who can keep up with me. Keep me under control when I'm like that," Michelle muttered. "It's not a problem," Asher muttered, trying to reassure Michelle, who was looking more and more depressed by the second. "How exactly do you keep a werewolf under control?" Abraham asked. You don't, Michelle said. Asher fights me every full moon to keep my attention on him and away from the rest of the club. Michelle, you're being too hard on yourself, Calypso chimed in. You can't help it. It's not your fault. It might as well be. Michelle stood up and walked away from the table. I'm going to bed. Abraham turned and watched her go. Solomon sighed and nodded for the rest of the table to leave as well. The whole table rose to their feet and began cleaning up. Abraham didn't move, but only watched everyone work. But then he looked to Solomon, who was staying seated as well. Anything I can do? Abraham, Solomon said, I appreciate how willing to help us you are. Warms my heart to know that you are so outgoing and caring. But this is a much more serious matter than simply investigating Katie's disappearance. This is a life or death matter. I must ask that tomorrow night you stay in your room and not come out until we've called you. I'm sorry, I know what you wanted. And again, we appreciate it. But there's nothing you can do, Solomon said more firmly. Abraham nodded in defeat, knowing that there was no point arguing anymore. He stood up and went to go help the others put away dishes and clean up. The rest of the house was quiet as they worked. An hour passed before Abraham finally went up to bed. Sarah and Tamil had gone off to bed not long ago. Asher was downstairs reading a book, and Calypso was taking a bath somewhere. He could still hear the water running, and he was beginning to wonder if she planned on flooding the room. As he walked up to bed, he walked by Michelle's room. The room was locked, and he didn't bother stopping to knock. However, just as he was turning the corner, he could have sworn he heard the faintest sound of a sob come from behind the door. His heart fell as he realized just how upset and nervous Michelle was, and that she must feel this way every time the full moon comes around. I wish I could do something, Abraham muttered darkly. He climbed into bed and lay down, the thoughts of tomorrow night filling his mind and dreams. And that was chapter 6. Take a drink real quick and I'll read some more. All right. Chapter 7. When the night of the full moon finally came, the entire house was on edge. Abraham could feel the tension in the air. Even Sarah, who was always so chipper and happy, seemed slightly out of focus and a little lost in her own thoughts. She spent most of her time in the yard weaving her webs around the borders of the yard and over again. Solomon stayed cooped up in the kitchen, staring out the window. Tamil sat quietly in the living room, not talking. His humor was dry and his spirit wasn't in it. Calypso was even more clumsy than normal. Her gaze was somewhere off into space, and she was easily distracted. However, of everyone in the house, it was Asher and Michelle who were acting the most odd. Asher would spend the day cleaning a pistol while occasionally slipping off into a short nap, which he would quickly wake up from and curse himself for falling asleep. When someone tried to speak to him, he was slow to respond, if he responded at all. Michelle stayed cooped up in her room. Unlike the other night, Abraham didn't hear her sobbing or crying, but he could feel like there was a great deal of emotion coming from the other side of that door, almost like a weight to the air. Abraham, Solomon muttered. Abraham jerked from his thoughts and looked up at Solomon, who was standing over him. Sorry, I was just thinking. I understand that. I really do. But it's time. Abraham turned to look outside. The sun was setting. Abraham felt his heart speed up. When will she change? Abraham asked. Probably in another 30 minutes. I wanted to remind you that you are to stay inside and not go near Michelle or Asher tonight. Abraham nodded. Suddenly he detected movement. In from the back porch door walked a very distressed and sad Sarah. Sarah, is it done? Yeah, she whispered. The web will keep her from escaping the yard. Thank you, Sarah, Solomon said. Abraham was about to open his mouth when he heard footsteps coming down the stairs. Everyone turned to look as they saw a very depressing sight. From down the steps walked Michelle. She wasn't wearing her normal clothes. Instead, she was wearing nothing but a torn-up old shirt and shorts. She was barefoot, and she looked very scared. Wrapped around her neck was a large and heavy-looking iron collar. Behind her was Asher, who was clad in his coat and red shirt. Strapped to his side was a pistol and a knife, causing a chill to run down Abraham's spine. He watched the two of them walk out the door before speaking. "Why does he have a gun and a knife? He's not going to hurt her, is he?" Abraham asked. "A werewolf can only be killed by silver," Solomon explained, "but they can be hurt by normal weapons. He uses those weapons to keep her under control and to keep her attention on him. But this happens every month, Abraham. They'll be fine." "She doesn't look fine to me," Abraham muttered. Would you be fine if you knew that in a matter of minutes you were going to go through an unimaginable transformation, losing yourself, mind and body, to a beast?" Abraham fell silent and walked to the window. He watched as Michelle stood in the center of the yard. She turned and gazed up at the setting sun and watched as the glow of the moon began to grow brighter and brighter. He could see a tear rolling down her cheek as she turned to look at Asher. Asher himself walked behind her and pulled something out from beneath the long grass. It was a large, heavy chain, made of the same iron as the collar, which he latched around that collar. He had tethered her to the ground. "You see, werewolves act on a destructive impulse," Solomon continued. "They must destroy and devour everything in their path. Asher will be her primary target, but to ensure that she doesn't come after anyone in the house, we chain her to the yard so that she can't get here," Solomon explained. As he said this, the sun finally set. Sarah covered her face and quickly scurried to her room. "Abraham, I suggest going to your own room as well. This isn't something you're going to want to see." Abraham agreed and walked to his room. As the light of the full moon shone through the window, he looked outside to see if he could get a glimpse of Michelle. And to his surprise, he could. He looked down and saw her. She was staring at Asher with the most terrified and sad eyes he had ever seen in any living creature. Asher walked forward and removed the shirt from her body, tossing it aside. And then he stepped back. The light fell on Michelle, and it happened. Michelle let out a shriek, suddenly arching her back as if she'd just been electrocuted. She screamed in agony, and there was a tremendous popping and sucking sound as her bones were realigning and readjusting. Asher just watched her, unfazed by what was happening. He didn't try to go near her or offer her any aid, but rather than just watching her with sad and helpless eyes, his hand shifted slightly to the knife. There was nothing he could do for her but wait. Michelle's body began to grow large. Hair began to grow out. There was more ripping and snarling sounds coming from her as her body continued its grotesque changing. Unable to watch anymore, Abraham pulled himself away from the window and closed his eyes tight. But even if he couldn't see her, that didn't stop the sounds coming from outside. Michelle was screaming, as if in dire pain. The sounds of cracking and tearing of skin and bone could be heard as her body continued to alter itself into that of a beast. There was the sound of a loud rip as her shorts were torn into pieces, and the sound of a loud cracking and disgusting sound of bones and muscles aligning. The screams that Michelle was making began to sound less and less human as they changed from cries into howls and growls. Finally, after almost 5 minutes, the sounds seemed to die down, and Abraham dared himself to look out the window one more time, and what he saw both mystified and horrified him. Michelle was gone. Under the light of the full moon stood a creature that Abraham could only describe as a giant wolf. It stood on its hands and legs, and its snout was long and lean. Its ears were perked up as if listening to the sounds of the night. Its teeth glistened with saliva, and its claws were sharp like knives. It was twice as large as Michelle had been, and it was covered with fur and hair. From its rump was a long tail swishing back and forth. Asher simply stared at the creature. While there was still sadness in his eyes, there was also the hint of anger. The werewolf suddenly stood on its hind legs, staring up at the gorgeous full moon. It reared back its large head and let out a long and powerful howl. Abraham felt chills run through him at the cry. "Abraham, are you watching this?" Abraham turned around to see Tamil and Calypso at the door. Calypso was staring at him. Tamil was just looking in his general direction. "I've never seen a werewolf before." Seen many time. Never get easier," Tamil said, trying to make a joke, knowing that he couldn't have seen it if he wanted to. Abraham tried to smile, but couldn't bring himself to. Calypso, though, just hugged her arm, looking very, very scared. He couldn't imagine having to see that horrifying change occur every full moon, and wondered how she had managed it. "So, what happens now?" Abraham asked. "Michelle's mind will lose itself to the beast, and then..." Calypso choked on the last words. "Watch if must. Tamil growled, looking away. Abraham heard a growling sound and looked outside to see Michelle on her haunches, snarling furiously at Asher. "Doesn't she recognize him?" Abraham cried. Calypso shook her head and hugged herself as her body was trembling. "Werewolves don't recognize friends. It only sees two things: enemies and food." Abraham looked back out to see that Asher hadn't budged an inch. Michelle snarled and began pulling against her chains, but the powerful bonds held her back, keeping her away from him. Asher sighed and walked a little closer. "Michelle, are you still in there?" he asked. The wolf barked and yanked again at its chain. "I'm here to help you. Take it all out on me." "What's he talking about?" "Werewolf filled with destructive anger," Tamil said darkly. "Asher let Michelle attack. Let out anger." Abraham nodded and turned to watch what happened next. Michelle let out a howl of anger and leapt forward, her jaws outstretched and her claws flailing. As she did, the chain began to strain and creak under the stress. Asher lunged at her and fired off a hard kick into her chest, sending her sprawling backwards. Michelle jumped back on her feet and roared again. But suddenly, Michelle stopped. She sniffed the air, her nose pointing towards the window that Abraham was looking out of. And Asher's face went pale as he watched her do this. "Shit, you smell him, don't you?" Asher whispered in terror. Michelle suddenly got a light in her eye, and she licked her chops. "You smell Abraham." Abraham tried to watch what happened next, but it happened so fast that he couldn't quite believe it. In a matter of seconds, Michelle whirled around and bit the chain holding her with her jaws, snapping the iron in half. In one move, she was free. Asher went on the attack and charged her. He fired off a bunch of punches into her stomach, causing Michelle to fall down and howl, but she was hardly fazed by him. She rushed after with claws extended. "Asher!" Abraham cried, but it was too late. Michelle leapt on him and tore him to pieces. Her claws tore away at his flesh and clothes as her fangs bit deep into his body, slashing and cutting away, sending blood and guts all over the floor. Abraham stumbled away from the window in horror as Michelle let out a blood-curdling howl to the moon, her bloody teeth flashing red. "He's dead!" Abraham cried. Michelle turned away from the beaten and bloody vampire and began to sniff around the yard, searching for a new scent. Abraham's scent. "She just killed him!" "No," Calypso said, but there was a hint of awe in her voice. "It takes more than that to kill Asher. Look now." Abraham turned his head to look down in surprise. The blood and guts that had been ripped from Asher's body were flowing back into it, as if they had a mind of their own. Shadows and bats were reforging the broken flesh and bone, and within moments he was back on his feet again, as if he'd never been harmed. The werewolf spun to see Asher back on his feet, and she looked genuinely shocked. Asher's face was obscured by shadow, but from that shadowy face, Abraham could see his eyes glowing bloody red, and his fangs parted in a vicious and malicious grin. "Not a bad try, Michelle. Sorry." Suddenly from inside his coat, he pulled the pistol and fired off 2 shots at Michelle's arm and stomach. Michelle let out a howl of pain and bent over in agony as the bullets tore through her stomach and ripped her arm. However, she had no time to recover. He had disappeared into shadow again, and from that shadow sprang a large black wolf, its eyes glowing red, just like Asher's. "What the? Asher just..." Abraham shouted in disbelief. "Asher is a true vampire." Solomon had walked in behind them, and he was watching the battle. "Many forms of media today try to water down the vampire into some virus or some superhuman genetic defect, but the truth is that Bram Stoker's Dracula was closer to the truth than any of the others ever were. Vampires have incredible powers, regeneration, shape-shifting, hypnosis, and this form of combat you see." Abraham didn't take his eyes off the fight he was watching. The black wolf that was Asher roared and attacked the werewolf. Michelle was far bigger than he was, but she couldn't stop Asher's jaws from closing around her throat and ripping away with intense malice. However, she used her own powerful claws to fling Asher off of her and slam his body into a tree. There was a loud yelp. Asher returned to his vampire form and sank to the ground, clutching his head dizzily. Michelle turned her eyes back towards the house and roared furiously. It was then Solomon suddenly realized what she was doing. "Everyone, get back!" he cried. Abraham felt Tamil and Calypso yank him away from the window just in time for the giant werewolf to burst through the window. Glass and wood flew, and Abraham found himself sprawled on the floor. He looked up to see the cold blue eyes of the werewolf leering down at him hungrily. Michelle's teeth were clamped in a furious snarl as a growl rumbled in her throat. Michelle, calm down," Calypso cried. She ran between the werewolf and Abraham, blocking its path. Next to her, Tamil came darting forward, both prepared to protect him. Michelle stared down at them for a moment, as if processing this new development. She then growled and pounced. Abraham trembled in fear. His time was up. They were all going to die. Suddenly there was an explosion of shrieks and howls. Abraham looked up to see a tornado of bats fly in through the broken window, flying in a typhoon of shrieking cries and flapping wings. Michelle barked and roared, swiping at the bats with her claws, but she couldn't rid herself of the vermin. "Asher!" Solomon shouted at the twists of bats. "Get her out of here! Pacify her immediately!" The bats suddenly began to join in a formation and fly into one solid mass, until the mass of bats took on a very familiar form. Asher was there, but his body was somehow different. Instead of flesh and blood, his body seemed to be made of some twisting and moving darkness. His eyes glowed red with fury. His body, though human in shape, was nothing but a mass of shadow, like some kind of black fire. What in the hell was this thing? Michelle made a move to attack, but the shadow Asher moved first, slamming itself with all of its might into Michelle, tackling her and sending them both flying out of the room and back to the yard. The shadow engulfed Michelle and slammed her into the grass. With one hand on her throat and another on the pistol, the shadow Asher raised the gun and pointed it at Michelle's chest, and he pulled the trigger. Once, twice, 3 times. Michelle let out a howl of pain, and then sank to the ground, eyes closed. Abraham pulled himself to his feet with Tamil's help, but he still couldn't quite find his balance. He couldn't believe what had just happened. What all had he just seen? He stumbled to the broken window and looked out to see the shadow form of Asher standing over the unconscious werewolf. He had his gun drawn, and it looked like he was moving it to aim at her head. "Asher!" Abraham turned to see a figure running out to the 2 creatures. It was Calypso. "Asher, it's okay, you can stop!" She kept running towards him, but suddenly her feet caught beneath her and she stumbled to the ground clumsily. Asher's glowing red eyes turned to look at her, and Abraham saw that the eyes seemed to be dimming. The shadows were lifting. Calypso picked herself up and practically crawled to Asher, who was slowly returning to his normal appearance. The shadows and darkness dissipating and began to vanish from view. His eyes were no longer glowing, and his body looked tired and beaten, but still unharmed overall. He leaned down and helped Calypso up, who wrapped her arms around his waist. "It's all right," Asher whispered. "I'm all right." Calypso held on tight, as if letting go would bring back that shadowy monster. Abraham watched the 2 for a moment and then looked down at the werewolf. "She's not dead, is she?" "No," Solomon said. "Asher didn't shoot her with silver. She will feel like she was hit by a train, no doubt, but she'll be all right in the morning." Tamil walked Abraham to the bed and sat him down. He tried to ignore the mess and broken glass all over the floor. "What the hell was that?" Abraham asked. "Was that really Asher just now? It looked like some kind of demon." Solomon nodded. "I haven't seen him like that in a very long time," Solomon said. "Not since the day that Katie went missing, actually." "What was it?" "It's a blood rage," Solomon said. "When a human body goes under a great deal of stress or fear, their adrenaline increases and they temporarily become stronger and faster. It's a survival reflex. Vampires experience something very similar. Their blood pumps faster, their power increases twofold. We call it a blood rage, and while in this state, Asher takes on the form of a living shadow. That is why he is tasked with protecting this family. He's stronger than anyone else here." Abraham nodded his understanding, still trying to process all that had just happened. "But why did he feel so much stress and fear? Michelle couldn't hurt him." "Yes, but she could hurt you, or Tamil, or Calypso, or Sarah. My guess is that his fear of any one of you being hurt sent him into that state, and he used it to stop her." "You are okay?" Tamil asked finally. The sun was starting to come up, and it had been hours since the event. Abraham looked out to see what had happened. Calypso had finally let go of Asher, and Asher was holding Michelle's unconscious body, which had begun to return to its human form. Her body was tired, beaten, and bloody. Her shirt and shorts were ripped away, leaving her naked. Abraham felt embarrassed at first to look at her, but he was glad to see that she was still breathing, and that she would recover. Asher had tears in his eyes as he walked her back into the house, carrying her. Sarah was outside taking down the web gate that she had built. She wasn't looking at Michelle or Asher. She was trying to keep her focus on her work. "So what happens now?" Abraham asked. "We go about our business," Solomon said. "We clean up the mess, and we prepare for the day. But, Abraham, I must ask that you not bother Michelle or Asher about what happened tonight. Perhaps we could all use some sleep before we do anything else." Abraham and Tamil nodded their agreement, and Abraham lay back on his bed. He was asleep before his head hit the pillow, but his dreams were dark. with moving shadows, and a wolf's howling a sad and lonely tune to the full moon. And that was chapter 7. Time for another drink. All right, chapter 8. Abraham, wake up. Abraham heard the voice, but refused to open his eyes. He groaned and rolled over on the bed, trying to ignore the sound coming from the foot of his bed. Leave me alone, Abraham groaned in response. There was a pause, and there was the slightest sound of movement. Suddenly there was a squeaking and creaking sound as a weight suddenly hit the bed. Unwilling to open his eyes, but becoming more and more concerned, Abraham turned his head away and rolled over on his back. Would you wake up, you silly Willie? Abraham cracked his eyes open at this. The sound of that voice was in no way familiar to him. It sounded like a little girl. But what was a little girl doing in his room? He opened his eyes and looked to the other side of the bed. Kneeling on the mattress next to him was a little girl indeed. She was wearing a blood-red sundress, and her little body was smooth and clean. She had black hair that fell down to the bottom of her neck. Her eyes were a very familiar dark red. She was smiling at him with a sweet little girl's grin. Abraham had to blink multiple times to make sure that he was seeing this right. Who are you? Abraham asked. He blinked and opened his eyes to look at the girl again. The girl was staring at him, but then the grin on her face quickly changed to a frown. She was glaring at him, and her red eyes were almost growling. Was she another monster? Stop being a lazy ass and get up, she snapped, in a much more familiar voice. Abraham bolted out of bed and stared at her in a stunned amazement. Only moments ago she'd sounded so sweet, like a little girl, like a child. But that voice, it was a male's voice. The girl crawled off the bed and walked towards the door. The door opened to reveal Tamil and Sarah, who were both bent over in fits of laughter. Tamil was leaning against the wall, trying hard to hold himself together. Sarah wasn't even trying to hold back as she was laughing so hysterically. Abraham was thoroughly confused. I'm so sorry, Abraham. We couldn't resist, Sarah laughed. What are you talking about? Abraham demanded. Who's the girl? The question only made Tamil and Sarah laugh louder. The girl gave Abraham a cold look. Suddenly her eyes glowed red again. Her body morphed and reshaped in shadows and masses of black fire. Her body grew and shifted until she didn't look young and sweet anymore. And when the shadows cleared, standing in her place was a full-grown and tired Asher. He smirked and turned his face to Tamil. All right, I did it. Pay up, he chuckled. Tamil high-fived Asher's hand before pulling out a small wad of cash. He handed it to Sarah so that she could count it for him. That's perfect, Asher. I hear his scream from the other side of the door. Tamil gasped through tears of laughter. Abraham couldn't help but stare with shock and a very much lack of understanding. Asher took the money from Tamil and glanced at Abraham. Either way, it's time to get up. Breakfast is waiting. Asher then walked off into the hall. Abraham pointed and stared stupidly as Sarah and Tamil howled with even more laughter. We should go now, Sarah chuckled. It really is time to get back to work, but oh, what a great way to start the morning. She scurried off and giggled the whole way, leaving Tamil and Abraham together, as Tamil still laughing into his bandaged hands. What happened? Abraham asked. Tamil smiled and patted Abraham's shoulder. Asher has power to change his shape, Tamil explained. Can look like anything or anyone. Thought would be fun little icebreaker if Asher woke you as Ashley. Ashley? Yes, name for that little girl form Asher can take. Does he do that often? Oh no, does not like form at all. We talk him into it. Tamil laughed and Abraham started to calm down and blush a little in embarrassment. It wasn't funny, man. It was funny, Tamil cackled. Really? Abraham walked around him and made his way into the hallway. Suddenly, he slowed down as he came by Michelle's room. The laughter and jovialness of the morning was now dead. No sound could be heard from inside, which caused a small lump of concern in his stomach. Tamil stopped laughing too and rushed to join him. Hey, Michelle, is she? Best not to worry, Tamil said warmly. Michelle tired. Best leave her alone. Abraham nodded and joined Tamil as they both walked downstairs. Sarah and Calypso were busy setting the table, and as Asher was sitting on the couch rubbing his shoulder, the same shoulder that he had injured when Michelle had thrown him into a tree. But How could he be that hurt? Hadn't he regenerated? It'll be a few minutes before breakfast is on the table, Calypso said to him as he came downstairs. Why don't you wait with Asher? Abraham nodded and went to go sit with Asher as Tamil came to join them. Asher scooted over some so that Abraham could sit down. He turned and smiled at Asher and then looked at his shoulder. How's the shoulder? He asked. It's healed, Asher said calmly. Regenerated from last night. Then why are you rubbing it like that? Asher gave him an odd look and shrugged. I can regenerate any wound or injury almost automatically, but I still feel the pain and the agony of the injury when it's inflicted. I guess I'm getting over that. Abraham nodded, and then Asher placed his hand on Abraham's shoulder firmly. Hey, listen to me, Abraham. Don't mention anything about last night to Michelle. Why not? Does not need the reminder, Tamil said sadly, his eyes downcast, despite the fact that he couldn't see anything anyway. He's right, Asher said with a voice as firm as his grip. Michelle has never gotten out of control like that before, and I don't want her to dwell on that. She has no memory about what she did as a wolf, and we don't want her to worry because she just lost control once. Abraham cocked his head to the side. So you mean she really doesn't remember anything? Asher shook his head. The werewolf curse activates the feral part of the brain. And when the transformation takes place, her mind slips into a primal and instinctive state, cuts off all logical thought and memory. She isn't aware of what she's doing, or even who she is, but the strangest part of it is that the wolf will act on her subconscious. I don't understand. It means that even if I'm in wolf form, the wolf will connect with my perceived conceptions and act on them. If I perceive a threat in my human form, then the wolf in me will also see it as a threat and do what it can to remove it. The whole room turned to look at the stairs where Michelle was standing. Her face was as tired as Asher's, and her hair was an absolute mess. She looked so thin and weak. She likely hadn't eaten or slept. Asher rose to his feet as well as Tamil. Michelle took a few hesitant steps downstairs and walked to the den. Asher, thank you for last night, Michelle said. No need to thank me, Asher said. I was just helping a friend. She smiled. Either way, thank you. I'm sorry if I hurt you. Asher shook his head. Michelle, why don't you eat something? Sarah called. Michelle shook her head and walked past Asher and stood in front of Abraham. I need a word with you, she said. Abraham nodded hesitantly and rose to his feet. He followed her out of the den as she led him to the front hall, where no one could see him. She stopped and turned to face him, and there was a look of dead seriousness on her face. Tell me the truth. Did I hurt anyone last night? She demanded. Abraham opened his mouth to answer, but he remembered Asher's order not to mention last night, so he quickly tried to think up a lie. His hesitance was a dead giveaway to Michelle. Look, I know that I lost control last night. I saw the damaged room this morning and the claw marks, and I also saw the broken chain outside. All I want to know is how much damage did I cause? Did anyone get hurt? No one, Abraham said, happy that he didn't have to lie. You didn't hurt anyone. Michelle gave him a very cold, inquisitive look, as if searching his soul for the truth. Her cold, husky blue eyes bore into his. And Asher? How did he get me under control again? How far did he push himself? Abraham wasn't sure how to answer. I don't know what... Please, Abraham. Michelle walked forward and placed her hands on Abraham's shoulders, and her hands were shaking. I have to know, how bad did it get? Abraham locked eyes with her, and he knew that he couldn't lie. Solomon called it a blood rage. Michelle moaned and let go of him. God damn it, she muttered. Then it got that bad, huh? Abraham gritted his teeth, knowing that he shouldn't have told her. I mean, it's okay, really. No one was hurt, and everything turned out okay. Michelle shook her head. Not for Asher. I guess he was rubbing his old wounds this morning. Abraham stopped and nodded. Michelle growled and looked away. That state is a... Asher does that when he's under a lot of stress or exhaustion. Yeah, Solomon told me it was like when a human has an adrenaline rush, Abraham said, trying to remember what Solomon said last night, and pleased that he wasn't totally out of the dark. Well, he's right. But what happens after the adrenaline rush passes? Michelle countered. Abraham's grin faded and he stared at her. When an adrenaline rush passes, your body goes into recovery mode. You're sluggish, heavy, you feel weak. And that's the same for him. His body's going through a recovery period. He's weakened. His regeneration power is slower. He's exhausted. He definitely overworked himself to keep me under control. Michelle walked to the wall and leaned against it. I'm dangerous. Especially with you here. Asher shouldn't have to go through all that every full moon. None of you should have to go through this. But Michelle, he does it for you. I know he does, she snapped. And that's the problem. He does it to keep me pacified. Abraham shook his head and stormed forward. Okay, no. He does it because he wants to protect you in the club, right? I mean, he doesn't do it because he hates you or because he thinks you're a monster or something. Look, I know I haven't been here long, but I think he goes that far so that you don't hurt yourself or others, right? So that you can be safe. I mean, look, if it was a real bother for him, then he'd just kill you, wouldn't he? I mean, who would put themselves through that every month for someone that they didn't care about? Michelle turned her head and glared at him. But then her hard expression softened. You know, you're a good kid, Abraham. She choked. Thanks. She stood up and walked past him, patting his shoulder with her hand in a show of gratitude. But as she walked past, Asher came to the door. Michelle paused and took a moment to hug Asher around the middle before walking past him again and into the den. He watched her go and then shrugged, turning back to Abraham. Man, I don't know what you said to her, but thanks. I think you really cheered her up. Abraham nodded and then frowned as he watched Asher make his way to the staircase. Where are you going? Bed, Asher said. I'm exhausted. Abraham watched him move slowly up the stairs and couldn't help but notice that there was a pained expression on Asher's face. Michelle must have been right. He was still recovering from using that weird power of his. Asher had so much strength, but all of it led back to being a vampire. What was it like to be one? Are they really that powerful? Hey, Asher, can I ask you a question? Asher stopped and looked back at him. Sure, go ahead. Abraham paused and thought how best to phrase his thoughts without sounding offensive or stupid. What's it like to... Asher stared at him for a moment, and Abraham suddenly felt the need to change the question. It suddenly felt wrong to ask something so personal. He thought of a quick way to save himself, and then blurted out the first thing that came to mind. What's it feel like to love someone? Abraham felt the need to slap himself across the face as he asked the question. Asher gave Abraham a nervous look and cocked an eyebrow. Abraham, you do realize that I don't stay in that girl form, right? That was just a joke Tamil and Sarah wanted to play. I am in no way interested. Abraham blushed and shook his head. No, that's not what I meant. Oh, God. He turned his head and growled. I've seen the way you look at Calypso and... Hush! Asher hissed fiercely. His eyes were horrified, and they were darting towards the kitchen where the others were, hoping that they hadn't heard. I don't know how you figured out about that, but you can't tell anyone. Don't tell anyone about that. Abraham nodded his head quickly. Promise. Asher sighed and turned to make his way back up the stairs, and then paused a moment, glancing slightly at Abraham. Makes me feel alive again, Asher answered. He then stalked off to his room. As he did, Sarah's head poked around the corner to see Abraham. Hey, come on, time for breakfast. Abraham groaned and followed Sarah into the kitchen where the rest of the table was already eating. Solomon was sitting at the head of the table. He turned and saw Abraham come in and smiled. Ah, good to see you, son, he laughed. Sleep well last night, did you? Abraham sat down at the table and pulled a cut of bacon over his plate as well as a spoonful of scrambled eggs. Yeah, I slept fine. Solomon smiled and leaned close to him. Today's going to be simple. The club is going to clean up the house and the yard area. You can help out or you can just relax. Abraham shrugged and looked around the table. Sarah and Tamil were talking more so than they were eating. Calypso was carefully digging into her food, what looked like fish sticks. Michelle wasn't really eating much, but just picking at it, but she did look more awake than she did before. Maybe a little happier. As he watched the meat, a thought came to his mind. Where do you get food from? Abraham asked. I mean, how do you afford it? That's a good question, Solomon said with a chuckle. Well, some of the money we get from Sarah, who sells her clothes and designs online, God bless her. Michelle and Calypso usually go shopping for food, but now that you're here, you can probably help with some of that. Abraham nodded. Hey, sure, anything I can do. Abraham finished eating his food and then looked around at the group as they continued eating. Hey, I'm going to step outside for a moment. He stood up and walked back to the front hall. He opened the front door and looked out to reveal the beautiful front lawn. He sat down on the steps and looked around at the lush green grass and the trees before him. The house just seemed a bit stranger every moment. After last night, he didn't know what to think anymore. What else would he see and learn? There was so much to take in. A sudden rustling of bushes and trees caught Abraham's ears. He looked up to the woods and saw a strange creature moving and crawling its way through the bushes. Abraham climbed to his feet and stared at it. and he felt an urge to call the others, but he couldn't look away from the bushes as this creature crawled out. His breath suddenly caught in his throat as he could behold what it was. It was a long and strange animal. Its upper torso looked like that of a young girl, with long and dirty dark hair. Her skin was slightly tan, but it was covered in cuts and bruises. Blood coated her small and delicate hands. Her head hung low, not allowing Abraham to see its face. She was a poor and lost creature, but the strangest part of her was below the waist. From her waist down, her body was a long and scaly snake tail. Her scales were caked with mud and clay and blood. She looked so weak, and her hands clawed desperately at the ground, trying to pull herself across the front yard and from the woods. It was like her tail simply would not work, and she was dragging it like dead weight. Abraham took a cautious step towards the injured thing. Are you all right?" The girl turned her head upwards, and her sad and empty eyes looked up at him with a look of absolute desperation and fear on those snake-like slits. "Help me." Her head suddenly fell and collapsed on the grass. Abraham jumped back and turned to the door. "Help! Someone, quick!" Within moments, Sarah and Michelle were at the door with Tamil and Calypso closely behind them. When they saw the creature in the lawn, their reactions were devastating. Sarah gasped in horror and turned away to bury her face in Tamil's bandages. Tamil, who couldn't see what had caused such horror, only patted her head and looked ahead blankly. Michelle was weak in the knees, and she had to grasp the door in order to hold herself up. But Calypso ran past all of them and dropped down next to the snake creature. She placed her hands over her and began touching her wounds, inspecting her and looking over her carefully. "Get Asher! Quickly! I need his help!" she screamed. Michelle turned and ran inside, sprinting up the stairs to Asher's room. Abraham dropped down next to Calypso. She grabbed Abraham's hand and pressed it again over a large cut. "Keep pressure on that. We need to stop the bleeding. Once Asher gets here, we can get her inside." Abraham couldn't help but notice the deep seriousness and firmness that Calypso was displaying. Within seconds, Asher was at the door. He looked over the scene and rushed outside. He cried out in pain as the sun beat down on his skin, causing a burning smell to fill Abraham's nose. Asher ignored it and wrapped his arms around the snake girl and lifting her up as easily as if she were a sack of feathers. "Grab her tail, Abraham!" Asher barked. Abraham wrapped his arms around her tail and lifted it up, following Asher inside. As they walked in, Abraham could smell Asher's burned skin, but nothing looked badly burned. Asher ran into the kitchen. "Clear a space!" Sarah and Tamil were already at work throwing plates and silverware off the table. Solomon was just watching them all, a terrified and shocked look on his face. "What on earth?" Asher placed the girl on the table and stepped back, collapsing on the ground. He was breathing heavily, and his skin looked tanner than before, as if he'd been sunbathing. Calypso ran to the table and began fussing over her. She was naked, and Abraham felt the urge to turn away again, but he couldn't just look away from this bizarre spectacle and how much attention this house was giving her. Calypso placed her hands on the body and began healing her injuries, placing water and rags on them. She barked orders at Tamil and Michelle, who ran to do their jobs with a little bit of help. Sarah was leaning against a wall, unable to look at the image. "What's going on?" Abraham cried out. Solomon stepped forward next to Abraham. "Abraham, I believe that introductions are in order." He placed one cold, ghostly hand on Abraham's shoulder and held his other hand out, indicating the snake girl. "Abraham, meet Katie." And that was chapter 8. All right. All right, we're on chapter 9 now. This is Katie?" Abraham cried. He looked at the long snake girl laying on the table. Her eyes were closed, and Calypso was leaning over her, bandaging her wounds and rubbing them with some kind of ointment. He had heard so much about Katie from the others, but he hadn't expected this. He shouldn't have been too surprised, though. After all, he had known she was a monster like the rest of the house. Asher pulled himself to his feet and nodded. Yeah, it's her," he groaned. Michelle spun around to see him, and she noticed that his skin was tanned and burned in some places from being exposed to the sun. She ran to him and held him up, making sure he didn't fall over. "Asher, you've been through enough. Go upstairs and sleep. We'll handle things from here." No, I need... Please, Asher, Calypso said, turning to glance at him. Don't overwork yourself. You're already weak from last night. Please. Please just rest. We've got this. Asher gazed at her, and his eyes seemed to glint a little. All right, I will. He turned and hobbled up the stairs to his room. Abraham watched him go, and they gave Solomon a worried look. Solomon didn't look away from Katie, but he seemed to notice Abraham's concern. Asher will be fine. Once the sun goes down, he'll be back to his old self again. Right now, I'm more concerned about Katie. Abraham nodded and took a hesitant step forward to get a closer look at her. Long, dark hair that was mangled and dirty. Body tan, and she had an almost oriental look about her. Perhaps from India or somewhere adjacent. Her long snake tail was bloody and bruised, but he could still make out its gorgeous emerald green scales. He looked up her body and saw that she was, again, naked, and he blushed, but he just couldn't bring himself to look away. What exactly is she? Abraham asked. She's a Lamia, Solomon explained. Much like Sarah's a half-human, half-spider, Katie's half-human and half-snake. She's the youngest one of us, and we were so worried that we had lost her forever. Sarah, who still refused to look at the unconscious Katie, suddenly let out a sob and tore herself away from the room, scurrying upstairs quickly. Abraham watched her run and looked at Solomon, puzzled, and Solomon shook his head sadly. Pardon, Sarah. She and Katie are very close. They're practically sisters. Seeing Katie like this is extremely hard for her. Calypso and Michelle moved rapidly around the table, cleaning Katie's injuries and taking care of her. Tamil was just leaning against the wall. His pale eyes were locked on the far side, and though he couldn't see what was happening, he could feel it, and it was plain to see that he was just as anxious as everyone else. It was about 2 hours before Calypso and Michelle finally finished patching up Katie. Calypso sat down and Michelle dabbed her forehead with a wet towel like a nurse would to a surgeon in the middle of a surgery. Calypso breathed slowly and the room was eerily silent. Solomon walked to the table and looked down at Katie sadly. Abraham suspected that if he could have cried, he would have. How is she? Solomon asked. She's exhausted, Calypso answered. Minor lacerations are all over her body, and she has a small concussion. Judging from the blood on her hands and fingers, she suffered trauma to her lower body and was forced to crawl most of her way here. I've done the best I can to patch her up, but all she can do now is rest. Abraham was stunned by her professional attitude. This was the same ditzy mermaid who stumbled and tripped over herself when she walked around, the same girl that blushed when Asher's name was mentioned, and here she was talking like a highly trained MD. Will she be all right? Michelle asked. Calypso smiled and nodded. She should be fine, Calypso said softly. Tamil breathed out a long sigh of relief, and the color came back to Michelle's face. Solomon leaned back and beamed happily. Thank God. Our lost lamb has returned. Abraham watched the room brighten up a great deal. There was a gasp of joy, and Abraham turned to see that Sarah had come back downstairs. Seeing that Katie was okay, she ran forward and wrapped her arms around Katie's body, hugging it tightly and sobbing. Tamil finally stood up and gave a small nod. Need rest. Should take Katie to bed, he offered. Everyone gave their nod of agreement. Michelle and Sarah both stepped forward to either side of Katie. Asher's sleeping. We'll take her, Sarah said. Sarah placed her hands under Katie's shoulders and lifted up her upper body, while Michelle lifted the lower snake body. The two took turns carrying her together through the den and up the stairs. We'll take her to her room. You don't mind, do you, Abraham? Sarah asked. Abraham shook his head, remembering that his current room was originally Katie's. No, not at all. Yeah, go ahead. Sarah smiled and led Michelle up the stairs, carrying Katie's body carefully. Solomon and Tamil followed after them. Abraham found himself tailing the group. He glanced back at Calypso, who was still sitting, but she motioned for him to go. I'll be fine. I just need some fresh air anyway. Abraham turned back to the group and followed them to Katie's room, fascinated and wanting to see more of this lost lamb. Hours passed on, and the evening was already upon them. The entire house, with the exception of the sleeping Asher and the tired Calypso, were all sitting in Katie's room, watching her, praying for her to wake up. Abraham watched the group as well. Sarah stood next to Katie's bed, stroking her hair and watching her through her big red eyes. Solomon stood by the door, keeping a close eye on everyone. Michelle sat with Tamil, breathing quietly as Tamil placed his arm around her shoulder. Abraham could see the amount of emotion flowing through the group. When suddenly they saw movement. Katie's eyes opened to reveal golden eyes, her pupils slits like a snake, making her appear exotic but strangely beautiful. She moaned a little, causing a ripple of response through the whole room. Katie! Sarah cried. Are you okay? Katie looked up at Sarah and blinked a little, not sure what to make of her. Sarah? she moaned. Sarah burst into tears and wrapped her arms around Katie again in a tight hug. "Oh, I missed you, little sister. I missed you so much." Katie slowly and painfully wrapped her arms around Sarah's middle and hugged her back, small tears rolling down her cheek. "I missed you too. I missed you a lot." She looked up at Michelle and Tamil and beamed. "Michelle, Tammy." Abraham let out a small chuckle when she called Tamil Tammy, but Tamil didn't seem to mind as he practically glowed at the sound of her voice. "Hey, Katie," Michelle said kindly. "We've all been so worried about you." Katie glanced at Solomon and frowned. "I didn't mean to scare you all." Solomon shook his head fiercely. "It wasn't your fault, dear," Solomon answered firmly. Katie grinned as more tears joined the trickling streams rolling down her face, when suddenly her eyes fell on Abraham. "Who's that?" she hissed. Sarah frowned and held Katie close. "His name's Abraham. He's new," she whispered. "He's human," Katie snapped. Solomon moved forward and pulled Abraham to his feet. "He's not an enemy, Katie. He's one of us now," Solomon said. Katie didn't look convinced. She turned away and buried her face in Sarah's shoulder again. Solomon pulled Abraham outside the room. Does Katie dislike me?" Abraham asked. "Did I do something wrong?" Solomon shook his head. "It's not you, Abraham. Be patient with her." He looked back towards the room and sighed. "Katie has a very deep prejudice towards humans, especially men." Abraham stared at him for a moment. "Why?" Solomon sighed and looked to the side as if looking for a way out of this conversation. "It's a very long story, and I don't think I'm the right person to tell you it. Just give her time, Abraham. She'll get used to you." "Well, what do I have to do to win her trust? I really don't want to stay enemies with her." "Well, Solomon trailed off and looked off in the distance. His eyes suddenly became anxious and concerned. Abraham saw him tense up. From behind him, Michelle came running to Solomon. "You sense them too, don't you?" she growled, and Solomon nodded. "How did they find us?" Solomon snarled. Abraham stared at them in confusion. "What are we talking about? Who found us?" Michelle didn't seem to hear him as she and Solomon began discussing earnestly what needed to be done. "We have to hide. We'll lock ourselves in the basement." "Not an option," Solomon responded. "We'll just be trapping ourselves down there, making us easy targets. We need to get Asher. He's the only one who can handle them." "But he's exhausted. He won't stand a chance, and further, the sun's not down yet." "When the sun goes down, he'll be good as new." "But it's only just starting to set," Michelle barked back. "Then we need to stall for time. We've got to do everything we can to buy time until the sun goes down," Solomon answered. "Well, I only smell 2 of them. I can handle them," Michelle offered, and Solomon shook his head. "You're just as exhausted as Asher. You won't last against them as you are. Go get Sarah. We've got to keep the house safe." Michelle turned and ran to the room. Solomon spun to face Abraham. "Abraham, I know that this is confusing right now, but I need you to listen carefully. The Dawnbringers they've found us somehow, and they've sent professional hunters to wipe us out." "What? What do we do?" Solomon raised a hand to silence him. "The only chance we have is Asher, but he is extremely exhausted. We need to stall long enough for the sun to set and give Asher the chance to regain his strength." "What did you have in mind?" "I'll help." Solomon smiled sadly. "I know. And frankly, you're our best shot. You're human. They won't kill you unless they know that you're one of our own. We need you to go out there and meet them. Try to buy us time. Lie to them. Tell them that we kidnapped you, that we'll offer you as a trade. Tell them whatever you want to, but just give us time, please." Abraham felt a chill run down his spine, but he quickly shook it off, knowing he had to do this. All right. Leave it to me. If anything happens, don't panic. I'll bail you out if things get ugly." Abraham nodded and ran downstairs to the front door. As he opened it, he couldn't see anything strange at first. The sun was setting in the distance, giving off a bright orange glow to the world as shadows snaked around the ground. The evening breeze caught the tall grass and caused it to ripple slightly. It was a lovely evening, and nothing seemed out of the ordinary until he saw 2 figures appearing down the dirt road, walking side by side towards the house. One was shorter than the other, and both had on trench coats. One wore sunglasses and had a buzz-cut hair. The other was a woman with blonde hair and blue eyes. She walked swiftly and with purpose. They were the hunters, the ones who'd kidnapped Katie and had caused the whole house to worry. Abraham felt his resolve strengthen and ran out to meet them. When they saw Abraham, they stopped and stared at him. "Hey, over here!" The 2 glanced at each other and marched towards Abraham. "What are you doing here?" the man asked. Abraham quickly began to think up a lie, working his hardest to make up a story that might believe. "There were monsters in that house!" Abraham cried, and the man nodded. "That's why we're here, kid. We're going to rid the house of them." He started to walk around him on the front lawn, but Abraham ran in front of them. But they aren't there anymore, Abraham shouted, and this caused him to pause. Where did they go? The woman asked. After they heard you were coming, they packed up and left, Abraham said quickly. His eyes darted to the setting sun. It still wasn't down yet. He needed more time. How do you know that? The woman asked. I saw them leave. They took off in that direction, Abraham shouted, pointing down the road. The man shot Abraham a glance that, even with his sunglasses on, looked cold and menacing. You're lying, he growled. Abraham felt cold sweat build up on his forehead. We interrogated the Lamia. She told us about the inhabitants here. They'd sooner die than abandon this place. And besides, even if they did, the ghost Solomon can't leave this house. His soul is bound to it. Abraham opened his mouth to tell another lie, but the man shoved Abraham to the side. Don't worry, kid. You've merely been brainwashed by these demons. We won't punish you. Just stay out of our way and let us do our job. Abraham watched as they walked past him and go onto the front yard. He spun to see that the sun, though lower, was still not gone. Wait, please! Enough, the woman answered. Stay where you are and keep quiet. Abraham felt a great feeling of anger and guilt fill him. He failed, and there was nothing he could do. Suddenly, the woman was lifted off of her feet by an invisible force, which launched her into the air and onto the grass. The man spun to meet it, but he too was knocked to the side by the force. Abraham watched in awe as Solomon suddenly appeared before his eyes. He was glaring furiously at the two hunters. You will not touch anyone in this house! The male hunter climbed to his feet and chuckled. Ah, so the ghost shows himself first. You really think we didn't come prepared for you? Solomon lunged forward to strike the hunter again, but the female hunter had moved as well. She slipped on a glove and reached out, and to Abraham's horror, the glove hand grabbed Solomon's arm and threw him away. Solomon landed in the grass and crashed in shock. The woman laughed. Glove soaked in ectoplasm. Can touch ghosts, even hurt them. Suddenly from the front door, both Sarah and Michelle appeared, with Calypso right behind them. The hunters turned to look, and both smiled. Oh, how nice of you. We don't have to waste time looking. We can finish you all right here. The male hunter laughed. How did you find us? Michelle snarled like an animal. Keep your leash on, wolf, the woman hunter barked. We simply followed the Lamia here. We followed her to escape we allowed her to escape so that she could lead us right to you. She had no idea that we'd been tailing her. The man then reached into his jacket and pulled out 2 silver stakes. The woman next to him pulled a pistol and aimed at Calypso and Sarah. Enough talking, he snapped. It's time to take out the garbage in this place. You know, I wholeheartedly agree. There was a sound of a gunshot and an explosion of brains and blood as the female hunter went flying backwards, an enormous bullet wound in her head. The male hunter spun to look at her dead body and then turned back to see what had shot her. Standing on the roof was a figure that was about as tall as the hunter, but he was shrouded by his leather jacket and a hoodie covering his face. In one hand, he had a pistol, which was still trained on the hunter. His other hand was tucked in his jean pockets. Even from under his hood, Abraham could see Asher's glowing red eyes. Abraham looked at the sun, and to his horror, it still wasn't fully down. If only Asher had waited a few more minutes. So, you're the vampire of this little group? The hunter snapped. The Lamia kept telling us how badly you'd kick our asses when you found us. And at first that caused us a little concern, but seeing how you can't walk out in the sun without covering yourself like that, you are no longer the hunter, but the hunted bloodsucker. Now you shall be the first to taste the sweet embrace of death. I really wish you'd shut up, Asher snapped. He fired the gun again, but this time the male hunter rushed backwards. Asher dropped from the roof and landed in the grass, and the hunter pulled the stakes again, bowing. Warren Matthews, the hunter said loudly. This is the name of the hunter that finally defeats the so-called Monster Club. With that, he lunged forward and swung the stake at Asher. Asher leapt away from the stake and spun, trying to aim his gun at Warren. He fired, but the shot missed, as Warren was already circling around and delivered an attack from behind. Asher turned to meet it, but Warren, without warning, stopped in mid-attack and threw something into Asher's face. It looked like some kind of powder, but it mustn't have been good for Asher, because Asher suddenly screamed, dropping his gun and cupping his hands to his face. Warren just laughed. I know your weakness, vampire. Your kind are fiercely allergic to garlic. So I was sure to coat my weapons in it, as well as carry along some other handy little trinkets. Garlic powder, for instance. Asher didn't answer, but only tried to rub the powder out of his face. Abraham tried to warn Asher as Warren moved forward with the silver, garlic-drenched steak. Asher! It was too late. Warren buried his steak into Asher's stomach. Asher screamed in pain and fell backwards. His hood fell off of his head, exposing it to the setting sun. His face immediately began to burn, and Abraham could only watch in horror as his face turned from tan to red to white. Asher tried to stand up, but Warren was already on top of him. He pulled a knife and held it over Asher's throat. "Rest in peace, bloodsucker." The world was plunged into darkness as the sun finally vanished beyond the horizon, and Warren swung the knife. Abraham screamed as Asher's head rolled to the ground, leaving a pool of blood behind. The bloody stump of Asher's neck still pumped blood as his corpse hit the grass with a thud. Abraham shook his head in disgust and in agony as he saw Asher lay motionless. The rest of the house had fallen silent, clearly in shock. Warren stepped back and wiped the blood from his knife. Now that I've taken care of that, I'll deal with the rest of you." He leaned down and picked up his fallen stake and walked towards Michelle, who was standing between him and the rest of the club. "You next, werewolf?" he demanded. To Abraham's eternal surprise and shock, Michelle smiled at him. She was even giggling. "Actually, yes, I do," she growled. "And what's that?" Warren asked, raising his stake. Michelle just glared at him with a look so venomous that Abraham felt the need to step away. "You really talk too much," she laughed. Warren gave her a puzzled look. "The sun set before you delivered the killing blow, you idiot. Why don't you take another look at that vampire you decapitated?" Warren, as well as Abraham, both spun to look at the fallen Asher. The blood on the ground, just like the night that Asher had fought Michelle, was flowing back into Asher's body. Warren turned fully around and watched with amazement as Asher's body suddenly stood itself up, with its head reforming onto his neck. He looked good as new, if not better. His eyes were glowing blood red and his fangs were bared furiously. "How in God's name did—" Warren demanded, but Asher didn't give him the chance to finish the question. With a snarl, he darted forward with blinding speed and struck Warren across the face. Warren responded by shoving the stake into Asher's chest, but before it even made contact, Asher's body exploded into a swarm of bats, shrieking, screaming angrily, striking and biting at Warren until he was forced to drop the stake and start flinging his arms like a drunken ape, trying to fend off the biting bats. Soon, Warren had to drop to his knees and cover his face to block the attack. But as he did, the bats flew into each other, reforming into Asher's body. He roared and yanked the hunter to his feet. "You hurt Katie. Let go of me, you monster! You struck Solomon and Abraham. Go to hell! And then you threatened my family," Asher finished. "I should shoot you through your goddamn heart and be done with you." Warren Matthews just smirked and shook his head. "Go ahead then. Do it!" Asher stared at him for a moment. His eyes fell on Solomon with a questioning gaze. Abraham looked up to see Solomon, who gave a slow and solemn nod. Asher growled and faced Warren again. "Abraham, go inside. Now." Abraham didn't move. His eyes were locked on Asher and Warren. Asher grabbed Warren's coat and ripped it from his body. "Go on, you freak! Shoot me!" Warren shouted. Asher's eyes suddenly glowed red. He leaned close to Warren's face, gripping his shoulders with one hand and his chin with the other, exposing the hunter's neck. "Normally I would. But after a very frustrating fight like that and having my head chopped off." His eyes flashed and he showed his fangs, causing Warren's smirk to quickly change to a terrified expression. "I'm really, really hungry." Asher reared back his head like a snake, opened his mouth, exposing long and razor-sharp fangs, and with one swift and devastating motion, he brought his fangs down on Warren's neck. There was a sound of a crack as Warren's neck broke under the force of the bite, and an explosion of red blood flew from Warren's neck as Asher's jaws stayed locked on the neck, drinking in the blood. Warren's eyes widened in pain and in horror, his face turning pale, and Abraham couldn't look away. He suddenly was roused from his stare by Solomon, who had grabbed him. "Let's go inside. Now," Solomon urged. He took Abraham's hand and led him back into the house, away from Asher and Warren. The rest of the house had all different reactions to the sight before them. Michelle looked on sadly but firmly, slightly sickened. Sarah was covering her ears and shutting her eyes tight, trying to shut out the image and the sounds. Calypso had turned away. There were tears in her eyes, and she was struggling to keep a straight face. At long last, Warren's body sank to the ground, dead, his pale face still twisted in terror and agony. Asher turned to face the house, blood all over his mouth and chin. He reached up and wiped it away, and then he saw the look on everyone's faces. He looked down darkly and walked forward. "I'm sorry," he muttered. He then moved past him and then went inside. I'm going to go check on Katie now that I'm awake. Sarah and Michelle turned to follow him. Solomon and Calypso stayed at the door with Abraham. Thank you, Abraham, for buying us the time we needed. If you hadn't helped us, Asher would have been killed. There's no way that Asher could have recovered from that decapitation if the sun hadn't set at that moment. It was nothing, Abraham said, still in a daze, but it's never easy watching him feed, Solomon explained. It's hard on him, too, Calypso added, her face filling with tears. Abraham wondered what she meant by that, but she was already walking back into the house. Solomon stood with Abraham and smiled slightly. I know that it may not seem like it, Abraham, but we won a victory today. We got Katie back, and we saved the house from destruction. And them? Abraham asked, indicating the two dead bodies. And Solomon shook his head. Sometimes we have to do things we aren't proud of for the sake of the ones we love. Abraham turned and smiled at Solomon. Solomon put his hand on Abraham's shoulder and walked him to the den, feeling a sort of peace wash over him at last. And yet he couldn't get the sight of those fangs and those red eyes as they tore into a broken neck. And that was chapter 9. All right. Let me drink something and we'll continue. If y'all are up for more. All right. We might do one more and then I'll call it because my voice is starting to hurt. All right. Here we go. Chapter 10. Dinner had been very quiet. No one really spoke as they ate. Abraham sat in silence as he could only watch and observe everyone eat. Only Asher and Katie had been absent from the table. Asher was in his room resting, as he'd been expending a lot of power earlier, and Katie was in her room, still sleeping off her injuries. Everyone else at the table barely touched their food. None were very hungry after witnessing Asher feed on the Dawnbringer assassin, Warren. Even Solomon, who was always uplifting and upbeat, had a dark look across his face as he entered his face the entire time. Now Abraham was sitting on the couch in the den. He was staring off into space and trying hard to wrap his mind around everything that had been taking place in the last few hours. Katie, the lost Lamia, had returned to them. The Dawnbringers had sent a pair of killers to their home, and Asher had killed both of them, feeding on one. What else could happen before he went to bed that night? Abraham whirled around to see Michelle behind him. Next to her stood Sarah, who was looking down nervously. Could we talk to you for a minute? What's wrong? Not here. Come with us, Sarah whispered. She and Michelle turned and walked to the porch down where they were pushed open the doors and rushed outside of the yard. Abraham followed and hurried after them into the middle of the place. The moon was still out, and the sky was a beautiful deep indigo blue. The stars above twinkled merrily as if none of the horrors that had been witnessed earlier had ever happened. Michelle and Sarah stopped in the middle of the yard and turned to face Abraham, and he paused and looked around them. Why do you want to talk out here? We wanted privacy, Michelle explained. Now listen close because we've got a lot to tell you, and we don't have long to tell it. We'll talk and you listen, okay? Abraham was taken aback by Michelle's attitude. It wasn't her normal tough and can-do sort of persona, but more nervous and anxious that filled her voice. All right, I'm listening. Michelle sighed and looked at Sarah, who gave her a nod. Michelle faced Abraham again and inhaled. You need to stay away from Katie. What? You heard me, Michelle snapped. What did I do wrong? Does she hate me or something? Sarah stepped forward, her red eyes filled with sadness. Oh, it's nothing like that. It's something you did, Abraham. We trust you, and we know that you won't do anything to hurt anyone here. But Katie doesn't see it that way, Michelle interjected. She doesn't trust men. But she gets along with Asher and Tamil just fine, Abraham pointed out defensively. Only somewhat, Michelle explained. Asher and Tamil aren't human, so she trusts them fine, but you? Right, I'm human. So she hates human men? Sarah and Michelle both nodded. Abraham groaned and stared up at the sky. All right. So what can I do? Just stay clear of her, for her safety and yours, Michelle said. We'll talk to her and try to help her understand why you're here, but until she gets used to you, she's only going to see you as a threat, Sarah finished. Why does she hate humans? Abraham asked. Michelle and Sarah exchanged a glance with each other and looked down. Michelle's stern attitude dissipated. How much do you know about Lamia? Michelle asked. Up until now, I've never seen or heard of them, Abraham admitted. Then you just wouldn't understand, Michelle said darkly. In time, maybe Katie will tell you herself, but it's not our right to tell you that. Michelle walked around Abraham and back to the house. Just, look, be careful, Abraham. For your own sake. Anyway, I'm going to bed. I'm exhausted. She then dashed back to the house and into it away from the yard, leaving Abraham with Sarah. Sarah had sad a look across her face as she started to head back into it as well. Sarah, Abraham said, Solomon said that Katie is like a sister to you. Is there a story there? Sarah's body stiffened as she shivered. Calypso, Katie, and I are the only ones here who were born the way we are, Sarah choked. Abraham could hear the tears behind her words. Asher was once human. So was Michelle, Tamil, and Solomon. But Calypso was born a mermaid. But even then, she lived on the other side of the world. Katie and I, we met before we came to the Monster Club, and we understood each other. We looked out for each other. Abraham listened to her and couldn't help but feel a sense of sympathy for Sarah and for Katie. I'm sorry. Oh, it's all right, Sarah said, turning and trying to gain her composure. She brushed her hair back and grinned. Regardless, we need to find you a new place to sleep at night, don't we? Abraham slapped his forehead with his palm. He'd forgotten that Katie would be moving back into her room, which left him with no place to sleep. Right, guess I can sleep in the den for now? But Sarah shook her head. No, absolutely not. You can sleep in my room if you like. I can make you a bed out of my webbing and everything. Probably not a good plan. Sarah and Abraham turned to the house to see Tamil standing up against the wall, just outside of the porch area. He couldn't see them through his glassy eyes, but he could hear them just fine, and he seemed amused. He had a small grin on his face. You sleep in Sarah's room, you not get out of it again. Sarah flushed and pouted and scowled. I'd clean the webs off the floor for him, Tamil. Actually, Tamil has a point, Abraham said kindly, putting a hand on Sarah's shoulder. Maybe it would be better if I slept in Asher's room. He's always out for the evening, so I wouldn't be bothering him. No. Asher doesn't like other people in his room, Sarah said. Besides, he might be tempted to feed on you if you stay in his room. Abraham shivered a little at the thought of that and placed his hand on his neck, remembering Asher's fangs ripping into flesh. He grimaced and shook his head, trying to rid himself of the thought. My room have space, Tamil offered. Sarah suddenly brightened. That's a great idea, Sarah said. Now, how do you like to room with Tamil for a while? Abraham considered this and smiled. All right, it sounds fine to me. I just need to get my clothes and move them to Tamil's room. Abraham moved past Sarah and Tamil and made his way to the end of the house. Tamil hurried after him towards his room, likely to make space for Abraham. Abraham moved quietly to his old room and then paused. Katie should be asleep right now and wouldn't be a problem. All he needed to do was grab a change of clothes and move them to Tamil's room. It shouldn't be a problem. With a small nudge, he pushed open the door and stepped inside. Katie? He peeked inside and saw that Katie was fast asleep in bed. She didn't move or even open her eyes as he tiptoed inside. He crept past the bed into the chest of drawers. He grabbed a stack of clothes and made sure that he had everything. All right, that should be... There was a furious hissing sound as Abraham was thrown to the ground. He felt a long and scaly mass slam on top of him. He looked up to see Katie, wide awake and furious, laying on top of him, staring at him with golden, serpentine eyes that were filled with rage. She looked beautiful, and her body looked completely healed. There wasn't a scratch or injury on her. How'd she healed so fast? Katie! Abraham grunted, having trouble breathing. Shut up, she spat. Abraham could hear a slight accent in her voice, and he realized that she was Indian after all. However, that knowledge really didn't help him here. Who the hell are you? I'm Abraham. We met earlier, Abraham whimpered. Hearing this only seemed to make her angrier. What the hell are you doing in my room? Trying to take me back to the Dawnbringers? I was just getting my clothes so I could move to Tamil's room, Abraham groaned, trying to get away from her. I swear I'm not gonna hurt you. Liar, Katie snapped. You're a liar. Abraham grunted and wiggled, trying to escape from Katie, who was leering down at him. She opened her mouth to reveal her fangs. I'm not lying, Abraham cried, hoping that someone outside would hear him. All men lie. Now shut your lying mouth. Katie reared back her head like a cobra prepared to strike, her long, dark hair silhouetted against her almost like a cobra hood. Stop! Abraham screamed. As if prepared for the worst, the door burst open. Tamil came stumbling blindly through the open door with Asher right behind him. Asher took one look at Katie and acted instantly. Tamil threw himself forward in between him and Katie. Unable to stop herself, she struck and sunk her fangs deep into Tamil's shoulder. Tamil let out a scream of pain and fell backwards. Asher dashed to Tamil's side, grabbed Katie using one hand, and pushed her off of Tamil and back to the bed. Before she could say or do anything, Asher's eyes suddenly glowed a very familiar red. Abraham turned his face away so that he wouldn't be caught in Asher's gaze, but Katie was already locking eyes with the vampire. Her eyes glazed over and her body went limp. Sleep, Asher commanded. Without a moment's hesitation or a second thought, Katie collapsed, unconscious and breathing softly. Asher stepped back and made sure that she was asleep. What the hell were you thinking? Asher spat. I looked at her bed. She was asleep, I swear. Asher walked around the bed and looked to see what it was. He pulled out something long and snake-like, but it was see-through and it looked badly beaten and torn. Wasn't her. It was just her skin. What? Lamia can heal wounds by shedding their skin. She was probably shedding it while you were all eating, Asher growled. That's what you saw. Asher turned and pulled Tamil and Abraham to their feet. You are really lucky, kid. Lamia venom's extremely toxic. It would have killed you in minutes. Abraham spun to see Tamil, who still had the puncture wounds in his shoulder from Katie's bite. Tamil was bitten, Abraham cried, but Tamil just laughed. It's okay. I already dead. Poison does not hurt. Tamil rubbed his shoulder and placed a hand around Abraham. I got the room cleared up for you. Just as he said this, Sarah and Calypso came into the room. We heard Abraham screaming. Is everything okay? Calypso asked. Yeah, we're fine, Asher answered. Sarah looked towards Katie's sleeping body and then at Tamil's shoulder. She moaned and shook her head, realizing what must have happened. I'll talk to her when she wakes up. She needs to learn to trust Abraham or we'll never have peace in this house. It can wait for now, Sarah, Calypso pointed out. Don't beat yourself up. Sarah smiled, but her face was downcast. Calypso moved to Asher's side to help him move Katie's body back onto the bed and under the sheets. Tamil reached his hand out to touch Abraham's shoulder so that Abraham could walk him out of the room. Are you sure you're okay, Tamil? Maybe Calypso should take a look at your bite wound, Abraham offered, but Tamil waved it off and continued. Takes much to hurt me. Problem is, cannot see. Need help finding way back to room. Sarah scurried up past him and stopped at Tamil's room. Abraham, I want you to see this. She opened up the door for Abraham and Tamil to walk in. When Abraham saw the room, he gasped. The walls were painted a sandy color with strange hieroglyph-like symbols on the wall. Seemed a silly thing, since Tamil couldn't see them anyway, but they were etched in, so Tamil could likely rub his hand along the wall and feel them. There was a sarcophagus by the wall, but it looked awful big to hold Tamil's smaller body. Abraham scanned the far corner of the room and saw a twin-sized bed. Abraham smiled, realizing that Tamil likely slept there. Tamil wandered into the room. He moved with ease and speed like one who had perfect sight, and he realized that Tamil was familiar enough with this room that he didn't need to see anything to navigate through it. Tamil sat down on his bed and stared off blankly. Do you like where you're sleeping? Sarah asked. Abraham looked to the other side of the room and suddenly groaned under his breath. The corner of the room had been covered in what looked like a hammock of silk and webbing. Sarah must have built that for him. It's nice, Abraham muttered. Sarah gave a small hurt look. You don't like it? No, it's not that, Abraham shouted quickly. I appreciate it, but won't I get stuck in it? Sarah giggled. Oh, no, you won't. I decide when the silk I produce is sticky or not. You can sleep in it just fine until we can find you a real bed. Abraham felt skeptical but shrugged off the suspicion as he was starting to become accustomed to the unexpected. Everything okay in here? Calypso asked, sticking her head into the door. Yeah, we're fine, Sarah laughed. Just getting Abraham accustomed to the new room. Calypso peeked around to see the web hammock and laughed. I should have known. She then turned to face Sarah again. Sarah, Katie's fine. I checked her over and she's okay. Sarah breathed out. Thank you. And how's Asher? Sleepy. Morning's coming, so he's getting really tired. Calypso said, I'm just going to go, check on him real quick. Calypso gave a little blush and then disappeared down the hallway towards Asher's room. Sarah and Tamil both laughed at her behavior, and Abraham only looked between them. What? Nothing, Tamil replied. Well, I'll leave you two alone now, Sarah chuckled. I'm going to go sit with Katie. Abraham got up and ran to the door with her. I'll go too. Sarah stopped and stared at him. That is not a good idea, she said. Look, I understand that she's dangerous right now. I get it, but I just want to learn more about her. Is it okay if I just tag along? Sarah thought for a moment and then shrugged. All right, but just stay quiet, please. The two walked down the hall into Katie's room. Abraham stood by the door watching as Sarah wandered over to her bed and knelt down on all 8 legs and stroked her hair. She had a sad look in her eyes. Her normal cheerful demeanor was gone and replaced by a look that could only be described as hopeless. Sarah, are you okay? Abraham asked. Sarah glanced up at him and shook her head sadly as tears started coming to her eyes. Can I help? No, Abraham. Not with this, Sarah said sadly. I'm sorry, Abraham muttered. I'm here, just like before. Do you remember? Sarah asked, brushing Katie's hair. I remember that night so well. The room around Sarah dissolved into memories and thoughts as her memory took her back to that night when she met that scared young Lamia, Katie. And that was chapter 10. All right, we'll read chapter 11, and that'll be the last one. Because I can't just hint at a memory chapter and not read it. Chapter 11. Sarah's memory. I could only stand there. I could only watch and listen to them as they pointed and they laughed. I was on stage in front of an audience of people who were all shouting and laughing. The bars of my cage felt so cold, and it made me feel so confined. I was dirty and I was freezing. The ringmaster did not consider me human enough to deserve clothes, so all I could do was curl up in my cage, exposing myself to the cold, to the elements, and to the crowd of onlookers. The ringmaster was standing on stage in front of the cage, introducing me to the crowd, but never calling me by a name. The little sign under my cage read, The Spider Girl. That was my name, as I had not been given one. I wasn't human enough to deserve a name, it seemed. I had nothing to call myself. When he called his show workers and assistants up to assist him, I shivered and backed as far to the edge of my cage as I could, as the 2 show workers came to my cage and opened the door. The crowd in front of the stage leapt and screamed in fear, terrified that I'd leap out and attack. But I wouldn't have, even if I had the strength or the desire. My spirit had long since broken, and the show workers knew that. Even so, they put a collar with a long chain around my neck and pulled me out of the cage door, standing in plain view of everyone, my naked body exposed, each of my 8 legs trembling, looking out at the crowd through tear-filled and defeated eyes. Behold, a real freak of nature, the ringmaster shouted. I winced at his words. I hated that one word. Freak. I hate that word. That's all I was to these people. A freak. She's part spider, part girl. What was God smoking when he made this monstrosity, huh? The crowd chuckled, but I only sobbed. God hadn't made a mistake with me, had he? Surely I was deserving of love as anyone else. The ringmaster walked towards me and lifted my dirty white hair back so that my breasts were exposed. I blushed and closed my eyes tightly as I heard the whistling and the catcalls. Such a twisted combination of beauty and beast, wouldn't you say? The ringmaster continued, egging the crowd on as they laughed and jeered. I didn't resist and I didn't speak, for that would earn me a lashing. I'd been part of this freak show for 9 months. I was more than used to this kind of treatment, but that didn't make it any easier. So what do you think, ladies and gentlemen? Is she a beauty or a beast? I couldn't bear to hear their answers, and everyone had a different one. I hated all of them. I wasn't a beast, and I wasn't a beauty. I was just me. But I didn't know who I was. I had no name after all. I threw my face into my hands and began to sob into them. I wasn't a freak. I wasn't ugly. I was just... I'm me, I tried to whisper. I wanted to scream it. I wanted to shout to the world that I was someone, that I had feelings, and that I was someone worth knowing. But what would these people know of it? What did they care? To them, my abdomen and 8 legs was enough to earn me the label of freak and strip me of any title worth remembering. Who was I to them but just another sideshow attraction? All I could do was keep my face covered by my own hands.
"But, folks, tonight we have a very real treat for you," the ringmaster laughed. "A new addition to our show that no one has seen before."
I looked up from my hands a little surprised. I hadn't heard about this.
"We just picked her up this morning, bought her off a trader all the way from India."
As he spoke, the assistants were dragging a new cage onto the stage. I looked inside and saw her. She was young, scared, and angry. Her tan skin was scarred. Her eyes were wild and fearful. She thrashed around in her cage, struggling to break free. Her hair was uncombed and all over the place. Her arms were tied behind her back, so she couldn't swipe at anyone. And when I looked at her waist, I saw that the rest of her body was a long snake tail. She was like me.
"This is a very rare specimen. Half girl, but half serpent. I wonder if she's related to our dear spider here."
I doubted that highly, but one thing I did know was that this girl had known pain and humiliation like I had. She was no stranger to it, and she was about to be paraded in front of all these people like an animal. She didn't deserve this. No one deserved this. And as I thought these things, the men went to her and dragged her from the cage, keeping her shackled by a large chain tied around her neck. She struggled and hissed furiously, fighting back. The ringmaster only grinned that same arrogant smirk. He walked closer to her and leaned down.
"So, why don't you tell us a little something about yourself, freak?" he muttered.
She didn't answer. Instead, she bared her fangs at him and gave him such a venomous glare that I could feel her bloodlust from the other side of the stage.
"What? Having trouble talking? You do have a mouth on you."
The ringmaster leapt back as the girl suddenly lashed out at him, striking like a viper. Her fangs nearly bit into the ringmaster's face. He jerked back with a shock, and the entire audience let out a scream of shock and fright. He stared at her angrily and embarrassed.
A fighter," he said. "Well, we can fix that."
I shuddered as I watched him reach for the whip, the dreaded coiling menace that he beat us all into shape with. My back still knew those lashes, still felt the weight of their sting as they cut into my flesh like burning fire. This poor girl was about to feel that same suffering, and I could only watch from beside my cage. The whip cracked once, twice, 3 times. I could hear the new girl crying in pain, but I refused to look. I turned my head away and winced with each snap of the whip. There was a pause, and I turned back to the child. She was laying on the ground, her body bleeding steadily. She looked so weak and beaten, but the ringmaster wasn't done. I could see it in his eyes. He enjoyed making us suffer, and he got a kick out of bringing pain. She was down, she was unable to move, and he wouldn't stop. And the audience seemed to enjoy it too, but of course they did. We aren't human, so our pain is enjoyable, right? And I couldn't take it. I couldn't stand it. "Stop!" I screamed. I rushed forward and threw myself over the bleeding girl, and the entire audience was in complete and utter amazement. Not only had I spoken, which I'd never done before, but I had run to the aid of another creature, defying my owner. I knew that I would probably be lashed repeatedly for this, but I couldn't ignore it anymore. I wouldn't let her get hurt anymore. This frightened snake girl stared up at me through pain-filled tears.
"What did you just say to me?"
the ringmaster spat. "That's right," I growled. "I can speak. The freak can talk. Does that surprise you? It shouldn't, because you can't seem to shut your mouth, and there's no bigger freak in this entire nation than you!" I'd said it. I had gone too far. I knew that I'd done the unthinkable, and had brought a world of hurt on myself. I didn't care, though. I couldn't bear to see this child beaten any more than she already was. She didn't deserve this. She didn't deserve this treatment. I'd gladly stay locked up for the rest of my miserable life if this girl could slither away and make a life for herself, make a name for herself, be someone other than a sideshow monstrosity.
How dare you speak to me, you ungrateful little...
He didn't finish speaking. He was too furious. I closed my eyes and waited for it to come. And come it did. 1, 2, 4, 8. The monster stopped his lashes at 20. I was bleeding so badly that I thought for sure my body had been permanently stained the color crimson. He was breathing heavily and steering over us, growling furiously. I could lay over the girl, protecting her with my own destroyed back.
You're extremely lucky that I still need you for the show, the ringmaster spat. You're going in lockup with no meals for 2 days. Get them out of here.
The stagehands ran up and lifted the girl and myself back into our cages, toting us off the stage as the ringmaster tried to restore order in front of his adoring public. I looked toward the girl who was laying in her cage, trying hard to recover from the pain of her lashings. "Are you all right?" I whispered to her. She didn't answer. She simply stared ahead without turning. "What's your name?" I asked. Again, she stayed silent. I felt sorry for her. She was repressing, and I couldn't reach her like this. "Katie," she finally answered. She had spoken so softly that I thought I hadn't heard her. I looked up and smiled at her, but the act of smiling was a painful one. "Katie, it's nice to meet you," I answered weakly. "No, it is not," Katie moaned. "There is nothing nice about this place or those people." I frowned and reached out my hand through the bars of the cage. "Still, I'm glad to meet you." Katie stared at my hand and then at me. "Why did you help me?" she asked. "Because I know the sting of the whip, and you don't deserve that pain." "And you?" she asked. I shook my head no. She then gave me a stern look. "Then do not do that again. I don't want anyone hurt for me." I smiled and then extended my hand further for her to take it. "All right, but I still want to help." Katie began to reach for my hand and tried to smile at me, but the pain in her eyes made it hard for her. "You know my name. What is yours?" she asked, and I shook my head. "I don't have one. I don't deserve one." But Katie shook her head. "No, everything deserves a name. So I am calling you Sarah." I stared at Katie for a long time. The back of the stage was empty except for us, and I felt the new presence of that name wash over me. "Sarah?" I whispered, and Katie nodded. "I think it sounds nice, and you are very nice. I guess there's at least something nice here, after all." I felt tears build up in my eyes as she spoke for me. "Okay, Sarah it is. It is nice to meet you, Sarah." She reached out and finally took my hand. We looked at each other and smiled. We were bonded from that moment on. We were friends. We were family. We were all each other had. Sisters in chains. And that was chapter 11, Sarah's Memory. All right. Well, that is probably going to wrap it up for tonight, guys. We made it all the way to chapter 11, which is awesome. But my throat is starting to hurt, so I'm going to have to call it there. You want to know how they escaped? That is revealed in a later chapter, actually. That is revealed later. But for now, that is the memory chapter. All done. I am going to call it there. Tomorrow is going to be interesting. I don't know if I will stream that night. I'm going to be real honest. I do not know if I will. The last few streams I've done have been kind of rough, and they haven't gone the way I've wanted. I've been considering taking a break from streaming, but since I'm not getting any subbing jobs this week except for Wednesday, I might have no choice. So that is what we know right now. Tomorrow we also have that announcement coming from Ubisoft about For Honor. So I will probably be making a video or a stream regarding that. So look forward to it. Anyway, thank you all so much, and I will see you in my next video. Take care.